How's it going, everyone? Nick Templin here from Templin Scouting, and we're on to our next video for off-season predictions. This time we've got the Vancouver Canucks, and this will be a very interesting off-season to look at because they're definitely going to run into some potential cap issues here. So we're going to do our best to try and make sure that we're making some trades to keep them under the cap and allow them to keep some of the star players that they have to re-sign this off-season. So, before we begin, just kind of looking at the roster before making any moves here. Obviously, you can see there's some key guys missing here at center and on defense. So we're going to make sure that we handle that. Personally, I'm not entirely sure what the situation is for guys on the long-term IR, if they're expected to return next year or not. I might make some trades just assuming that they will be back next year. But we'll see about that. So without further ado, let's take a look at the unrestricted free agents first that Vancouver has to sign, which is definitely less than the restricteds. So definitely an interesting summer for them to make some decisions here. I think Chatfield's a guy that they're going to want to bring back for sure. I think he's provided some solid depth on the back end. He's a nice physical defenseman for them. So yeah, they'll keep him around for another year. Looking at some of the other guys that they would have to re-sign this year, Brandon Sutter might be worth bringing back on a cheaper contract. He actually didn't have too bad of a season. But aside from that, Edler's a guy they could think about. He didn't look great last season. He might be able to move on somewhere else on a really cheap deal and try and win a Stanley Cup somewhere. As far as these other guys, I don't think they're going to want to bring any of these other guys back. So I think I will bring back Brandon Sutter, on a much cheaper deal than what he was getting before. So I think he'll get somewhere in this range. And they'll just sign him for like a 1-year deal, as he is getting kind of older there. Just to provide a little bit more depth at center. But then moving on quickly from there to the RFAs, because that's where it really starts to get interesting. They have these guys that have to be signed, so we're going to start with a big one here, and that's Quinn Hughes. What's he going to get? Well, offensively, he's been a really dynamic player the past 2 years for them. But he's definitely been lacking defensively, so that's important to keep in mind when thinking about what kind of contract he should be getting. So, you don't want to overpay, but you also don't want to, totally insult him to the point where he starts demanding trades or anything. So, you probably look at something in this range for him, $6 million. Just make sure I have the right number of zeros there. So it's, yep, we're good. And try and get him on long term. So $6 million over 5 years for Quinn Hughes, I think, is a really good deal. So you get him in, put him there up on the top pairing. There we go. And now things get a little bit difficult because you're looking at $12 million in cap space, and you've got to sign a few other guys here. And the next big one is Elias Pettersson. He is a guy who's going to be worth at least $8 million annually. I know he was away with injury for most of this past season, but when he's been healthy, he's been a really dynamic franchise center for them. So I think somewhere in the 8.5 range is probably what they'll be looking at for him. And then they'll probably try and get him on for like 6 years. And there you go. There's your first line center. Now we're working with $4 million in cap space. Looking at Joel Levy and guys like Cole Lind that are definitely going to be brought back. There's some other guys here that I'm sure they're going to bring back too. But unless they're like definitely roster players, in my opinion, I'm just going to kind of leave it for now. And I'm sure they'll get signed, but if they're not part of the roster, it doesn't really matter too much for the purposes of this video. So Joel Levy probably get something in this range, just because he's now becoming, an actual roster player. Just make sure that I have the zeros on that correct. Yes, I do. So sign him for another 2 years. Keep him back there on the defense. And then looking at Cole Lind will be the other one that I'll sign for the purpose of this video. So he hasn't quite made an impact on the NHL yet, so he'll probably be looking at one of the higher, AHL level contracts here. So we'll sign him for 3 years on that. Maybe he wouldn't accept 3 years just because he's probably going to get more money not too long from now, but this takes him till he's 25. He gets a few years to show what he can do, and then he can kind of cash out after that. From there, I'm going to move some guys down to the minors that shouldn't really be here. So Lockwood, for example, is not there next season. I don't think he'll make this team. And as far as other guys, we keep Antoine Roussel kind of in the scratch category. We might even trade him depending on if any teams would be potentially interested in him. So before making any trades, this is kind of what we're looking at. Don't love it. They've got a lot of dead cap that they need to get rid of. So we're going to kind of start to take a look at some of that. And also Hoglander needs to be higher up in the lineup. So actually, we're going to put him here. So some of the guys that they definitely want to look into getting rid of are Jake Virtanen. If possible, they'll try and get rid of Louis Eriksson and but Colson probably makes this roster next season as well, so that's important to keep in mind. Holtby might be another guy that they try and trade if they can find a trade partner. Don't think they're going to be able to deal Myers away, so that's somebody they're going to have to just try and keep for now, try and maximize his value as much as possible. So let's start with Jake Virtanen. So Virtanen is he's still on the younger side. I think he's 23 or 24 at this point. So there could be some value there. He's not overly expensive. There's probably going to be some teams out there that are potentially interested in acquiring somebody like him to be like a third line forward for them. So just kind of looking through some of the teams that might be interested in a guy like him. I think Colorado would definitely be a team that could potentially look into him, but I think Vancouver will try and not deal with the West if possible. It's not like he's a star player, so dealing him to a Western team probably wouldn't be the end of the world, but I think, in most cases, you want to trade your players as far away from where you are as possible. I like Pittsburgh as a potential location for Virtanen. I think that he kind of fits the mold of what they try and do depth-wise. He's a nice contract for them to pick up potentially, and they can even potentially sign him for less next season if he doesn't really earn the money that he's already making. So just kind of looking at some of the guys that could potentially go back the other way as part of this trade. Just because they're probably, if you're Vancouver, you don't want to take any sort of massive contracts back. So I do like Sam Lafferty potentially as an option. I do like, let's see, where is he? Sam Miletich potentially as well. So I think we can go with Lafferty and kind of just do it as like a 1-for-1 deal here. Actually, just to take on Jake Virtanen, you might need to throw in like a 6th round pick or something like that. Or actually, hold on, we can get a little bit more creative with this. So go 3rd round pick. In exchange, you get a 5th round pick back from the Penguins. So at surface value, Vancouver fans may not love this because you're trading a guy who's been in the NHL for a few years for a guy who hasn't been a consistent mainstay in the league. But you're making a cap move here for sure. Something that this team really needs to do this offseason if they want to get really creative with some of the moves that they can make. So personally, I think that this is a really smart deal for Vancouver to make, even though on surface level it looks like they're giving up the best player and the higher pick. Overall, I think Sam Lafferty can be a member of the Vancouver Canucks right away, and you're just moving back 2 rounds in the draft to get rid of $2.5 million worth of cap. That is a player that hasn't really been productive in his entire time with the team. So moving on from there, there's a few other guys that I kind of like as potential trade bait guys. JT Miller is one of them. Miller has been actually pretty good in his time with Vancouver. His first season there was actually very successful, I thought. But he's still got 2 years left on this deal, and we're kind of starting to see him regress a little bit, and so it's kind of time for them to potentially look at a team that might want to take him on. So looking at some of the teams that could be interested in a player like JT Miller, there's potentially, let's just see, Montreal maybe, potentially Dallas. I could see them being interested. Nashville I kind of like as an option because they need to kind of retool what they've got going on there. Maybe if you could find a way to make it work with Chicago, but I know they're having their own cap issues. So let's take a look at Nashville and kind of see what they can offer. They're a team that has cap tied up into some players that they'd probably rather not have, namely Victor Arvidsson, potentially just looking at some of the other guys here. Matt Duchene, they probably would like to find somebody to take him on. I kind of have an idea for him when I do Nashville, so he won't be going in this video here. Just looking at some of the other guys here. Hansen's expensive. They're going to want to get rid of him, but not for this deal here. So I think what I'm going to do, and this could be a pretty interesting trade potentially here, is make a trade involving JT Miller and Victor Arvidsson. So just going to have to figure out kind of how to make this one work, because it's kind of tough to gauge the value of these two players, as they've been, pretty productive offensively in the past. But, Arvidsson just came off a season where he only put up 25 points in 52 games, less than half a point a game. So, not ideal. And JT Miller, I don't have his stats right here, but I know that he didn't have the best year either. So it's hard to kind of say which of these players would be more valuable. I think, Arvidsson, you can make the argument because he's a little bit younger, that he's probably the more valuable guy, and because he has the slightly better contract here. Although there's 3 years remaining on his contract, whereas Miller's has just the 2 years left. So they're pretty close in value. So in order to make this kind of go through, we can look at some of the non-roster guys that that Vancouver has at this moment. And actually, I have an idea for a much bigger trade that can kind of happen here. So something that I was kind of looking into as well was Matthias Ekholm, who he's going to need to be moved, I think, out of Nashville if they're going to start retooling this team, and he'd be a great fit here in Vancouver, just because they do really need a really solid second pairing defenseman potentially to play with Tyler Myers, which would be really great. So in order to make this one go through, you send back a guy like Jet Wu and let's just see what would have to be involved here. Let's go with the 2023 second round pick to make this one happen. That might be a bit much, actually, because I think the value between these four players, it's pretty close overall. So, and the other thing to kind of note is that, Vancouver going into this trade is trying to cut cap. They end up kind of taking more cap this way, but overall I do think that this is a move that they can afford to make. They have the room to make it, and I do think that this has the potential to make them better. So just looking here, potentially if there's another guy that they can throw in here just to like a Furland or Beagle or something like that, Antoine Roussel maybe. Yeah, I think I like that, potentially adding on to the trade. So and in order to get rid of his salary as well, that's where a pick is probably going to have to come in to help them make that move. So now I'll add the 2023 second round pick, make that deal, and there we go. So JT Miller, Jet Wu, and Antoine Roussel, along with a second round pick, headed to the Nashville Predators. Oh, and that second round pick is 2023. Just, a little bit less value than the next 2 years worth, just to kind of make that them want to take on all that salary that they're going to be taking on. But then I guess in the end, the salary is not too different. It's about $1 million difference in what they acquired versus what they got rid of. So then they got Victor Arvidsson, who I'm going to move right up to the first line just for now. And they also got Matthias Ekholm, who can be a really solid second pairing defenseman for this team. Already this team is looking much better than it was previously. Next, we will look at Braden Holtby as a potential trade bait player. So he'll have to go to a team, that I think he's more at a state in his career where he's better as a backup. And because of the money that he's making as a backup, Vancouver's going to definitely have to retain some of his salary. So a team that definitely is going to need to have a solid backup next season is Philadelphia. And Holtby is a good option for them because he also has the potential upside still as a starter if need be, if things aren't really working out with Carter Hart. So how are we going to make this one happen? Well, first we're going to retain some salary off of Holtby's contract. So just going to take off about 1.3 million, just get it down to 3 million total. There we go. And in exchange, the Flyers can send probably an AHL level forward and like a second or third round pick. I would say probably more of a third round pick to make this happen. So, you send like Shushko and a third round pick to make this one go through. And there you go. Holtby headed to Philadelphia to help them with their goaltending depth, and you get a lot more cap space out of that. So good thing for Vancouver overall. You can throw Shushko down in the minors, who wouldn't be ready to play yet. He is a guy who potentially could be like a bottom six forward, but honestly, you're just happy making that trade to open up the cap space just a little bit more for your team. So with all that being said, DiPietro, I think, can become the backup next season. If not, maybe Artur Silovs can do it. If you want to go out in free agency and sign one, that's a potential option as well. For the purpose of this video, I'm just going to trust that DiPietro is ready to go. So looking at the lineup that we have and just kind of seeing what holes could still be filled. What just happened there? Lafferty ended up there. Trying to put him as a scratch. So just looking through, they could definitely still use somebody on the second line, because in an ideal situation, Pearson's probably a third liner. You can use Vasily Podkolzin there, and Highmore probably becomes a scratch, either him or Cole Lind. So kind of just looking for a nice second line left winger for them. So let's take a look at the free agents that are available. At left wing, looking at points. So again, I don't think Landeskog or Ovechkin will be available. Taylor Hall is a potential option. I think he's going to try and sign somewhere that's a legitimate contender next year after he made the mistake of signing with Buffalo. Zach Hyman I don't think will be available. We've already used Blake Coleman in another video. Thomas Tatar could be available. You could look at Matthias Janmark and see how he's kind of performed in the playoffs this year, but that would be kind of another one of those Jim Benning moves where he takes a chance on somebody who has shown some upside, but then gives him way too much money and it ends up not working out. Jaden Schwartz, actually, I like that option. He's been hurt a lot lately, but he does have that upside to be that second line forward, and you could probably get him for cheaper than what he was being paid before, just because he hasn't been producing at the level that many thought he could. So just looking at like a $4.5 million contract over 3 seasons for Jaden Schwartz, then you get him on the second line. That leaves you only with a sliver of cap space, so obviously they could take a look at some other guys that they could potentially cut off the cap for here, but overall, I think this does give them at least a little bit of freedom if they want to acquire somebody at the deadline, if they do end up having a successful season. And yeah, I do think that this makes them a better team overall. You can look at the defense and kind of say, well, Quinn Hughes, is he really ready to be that number one guy? He hasn't found that defensive game just yet. Tyler Myers, he's being overpaid, and is he really good enough to be a second pairing defenseman? Overall, I think a lot of it comes from coaching too. If Travis Green doesn't come back next year, which I think he may not, I don't recall at the time of this video being recorded if he has been fired or not. But potentially the right system can help those players out. But overall, I think you're putting yourself in a much better situation than they were in last season. You've got definitely some more experienced defenders back there. Ekholm being added is a really solid add for them. It would be really good for them if they can also sign him to an extension. That would be really good for the long term. And you're taking on a guy like Victor Arvidsson, who has shown in the past that he can be a really solid playmaker, decent goal scorer as well. And he's playing on a line with guys like Elias Pettersson and Brock Besser, who are both really good goal scorers. So you could really see a resurgence in his career through a trade like the one that we made. So obviously I made some pretty questionable trades. I'm not going to lie about that. I know there's going to be people who are a little bit definitely going to be questioning some of these moves and say, why would Nashville want to take on all these players? Why would they take on this extra salary cap when they're having cap issues themselves? And then I'm going to have Vancouver fans saying, why would we have to give up a third-round pick with Virtanen to, acquire somebody like Lafferty? But overall, I think, these are kind of the realistic trades that we do kind of see these days, where if one team has to give up a lot of cap, not a lot of cap in Virtanen's situation, but a significant cap for a player that hasn't really earned it. You do see them adding a little bit of trade value with it to make it happen. So yeah, but looking at Holtby as well, it's kind of the same situation. Overall, I think these are trades that these teams would accept, and they would also make Vancouver better. So you guys can let me know down in the comments below what you think of those moves and what you think of this upcoming Vancouver Canucks roster that I've put together. You can also like the video if you like this content, and you can subscribe if you'd like to see more of it in the future.